to stay on that same wavelength, bringing up what happened last year, Tony, you and I had this conversation a number of times during the off season that a number of national folks that I talked to that aren't close to the situation didn't really analyze the UCLA situation last year and the results, thought, okay, Chip Kelly's taking a major step here and going 8-4. Well, they beat the lousy teams they were supposed to beat. They lost to everybody with a pulse, good teams. You weren't impressed. You didn't feel as though that was necessarily a step in the right direction. This season, where do you stand on this season?
It's to be determined. I don't think we know yet, to be quite honest. I'm not ready to characterize this season. The 8-4 year last year was really the bottom line of where they should have been. They didn't beat anybody with a winning record that finished the season with a winning record. It felt great to beat, blue blood like LSU. And then we saw where LSU's season went and you're like, yeah, okay. Turns out LSU wasn't that good and the coach got fired.
And I was really looking forward to the Holiday Bowl. That was a good matchup.
Yeah.
Hey, I was down there ready, and my phone, as soon as Martin Jarman told the crowd at one of the booster breakfasts, the day of the game, my phone starts cranking like crazy, and yeah, it was predictable that it would be canceled. And, without delving too deep into that, there's an interesting, because I do want to get back to Mark's question, but there's an interesting side story in that even as UCLA was winning, they didn't think they were going to get the fans, we'll call them the social media fans. They're different than the people who don't engage and they just go watch the games. They were convinced the playoff committee would never give them a shot anyway, because the chairman of the playoff committee is Boo Corrigan, the athletic director at North Carolina State. I had to tell people, look, Boo Corrigan doesn't care, because guess what? North Carolina State got their payout from the Holiday Bowl, and the ACC got their payout. UCLA didn't, because of the way this went down. So Boo Corrigan was like, hey, we pulled in a few million without having to do anything. Thanks. Appreciate it. He was not going to hold UCLA back. Back to the point of this season. Look, 9 wins was, I think you and I talked before the season started, Mark, and I said 9 wins is the bare minimum. It has to be, because you're going to go 3-0 and out of conference, because it's one of the weakest out of conference schedules in the country. And yes, I know why. I know about the Michigan buyout and all those things. Fine, whatever. You had a chance to replace one of the other teams 2 years ago when you knew about the Michigan buyout, but that's a whole other topic. You're going to get 3 wins there. You have to win 5 to 6 out of the Pac-12 schedule. And so I was looking at, 9 is the bare minimum, 10 is good, and then, everything over that is gravy. So I don't think we know yet what it is. Look, I think that, and believe it or not, I think depending upon what happens Saturday at the Rose Bowl, the Cal game is a potential danger game. If USC beats UCLA and they've lost 2 in a row, man, as bad as Cal's offense is, and who knows what it'll look like now that they fired the offensive coordinator, you can look at Cal coming in and, doing some crazy, dangerous stuff to UCLA.
Like it did to USC.
Right, exactly. So I don't think we know. I think we really need to play this out over the next 2 weeks. And then do they get to the conference championship game, and how competitive are they if they're facing Oregon again? Things like that. I think it's still to be determined. 8 wins is, it's fine. You were supposed to get there. Even 9 wins, you were supposed to get there.
Let me cut in real briefly before you make your point. I'm going to respond to this viewer. Mark never believed in USC. It's documented on YouTube. Again, my USC prediction was 9-3, 7-2, and a first place tie in the Pac-12. Whatever you want to take that as, not believing in USC or whatever, however you want to take it. Our guy D, he shows up every week Let me know that I was way off on USC.
You know what? You know what you are, Mark? You are the network announcers for every college football game ever. Because no matter who is broadcasting a game, you can go on both teams' fan pages and they'll tell you, oh, these announcers hate us. They're biased. You could tell. You will go to the USC and UCLA, fan pages on Saturday, and they'll talk about, oh, this, they'll blame Gus Johnson. I mean, how do you blame Gus? They'll say Gus Johnson always hated USC, and then you go to the UCLA ones. Oh, he's never liked UCLA. That's what you are. No matter what you say, Mark, the other team is going to say you never liked us. You never believed in us.
A couple of months ago on Twitter, I actually took a screenshot of comments on a post where back-to-back comments, one blamed me for being a homer on one side and another, they were right next to each other on the same video.
I totally believe it. And I believe it probably happens to you quite a bit. It's like, you look at when I was at the Wake Forest, North Carolina game last week, both sides were like, oh, the refs are jobbing us, both fan bases. And it's like, well, they can't be jobbing both of you and if they are, then it's neutral and it really doesn't matter much. Every fan base thinks the refs are, the worst ever in that particular game and, trying to screw over that school.
I don't have a question for you, Tony, right now. I just want to kind of piggyback on what you said about UCLA's season and kind of the verdict, the larger assessment being still to be determined. I think USC is in the exact same position.
Yeah, I agree.
USC does not have that high-end win. And like Penn State is another example. Penn State is in line to be 10-2 with the 2 losses being in the 2 most important games. Like that is a season that I see a lot of. There's always at least 2 or 3 of those kinds of seasons where a team is 10-2, but the 2 losses were the 2 most important games. So USC needs to at least win one of these next 2 games. If USC loses each of these next 2 games, this season is a failure. And that might seem harsh for year 1 under Lincoln Riley, but hey, you've gotten this far. But, you're playing in what has been a top-heavy Pac-12 with a very mushy, gooey middle. The Pac-12 is not as deep as it was.
Mushy, gooey, yeah.
Like, you need to walk away from this season with at least one high-end win. And I can, UCLA is a better win than Notre Dame if we're going to compare. But you at least get one of these 2. At least get to 10-2. And as I was remarking earlier to Mark at the very top of the show here on the Voice of College Football, if USC does get 10-2, the odds are increasing that will be a Cotton Bowl resume because you're seeing the teams underneath USC lose. And so USC's odds of finishing in the top 12 with a 10-2 record, with a split of these next 2 games, USC's odds of finishing in that final top 12 on Sunday, December 4, which would enable the Cotton Bowl to be in play. Those odds have gone up steadily over the past month with the results, with Clemson losing, Alabama losing, Ole Miss losing, the various teams in the Big 12 losing. USC's odds of the Cotton Bowl are going up. And, of course, at USC, you want to be in the Rose Bowl, if not the playoff. Like, those are obviously the 2 top-tier goals. But, like, the difference between the Cotton Bowl, which is right in the middle, and Rose Bowl playoff, that's a much smaller distance than the distance between the Cotton Bowl and Alamo Holiday underneath it.
Yeah.
Like and USC fans might think that I'm settling here, but like if you told me right now USC is going to be in the Cotton Bowl as opposed to the Alamo and Holiday, but also as opposed to the Rose or the playoff, like I would take that deal. Now that's just me. I'm not speaking for USC fans. I'm just speaking for me. If USC gets that out of year 1, like that's really, really good. That's a good landing spot. But if it really losing twice and going to the Alamo or Holiday, man, that would just be a total buzzkill and just a very empty feeling from a USC perspective.
Well, and I think a couple of things that you bring up there. One, we didn't know what to expect. even with all the bells and whistles of Lincoln Riley coming, and, we joke that, half of his roster came in the transfer portal. It wasn't quite half, but it felt like it at times. You didn't know what to expect. You didn't know, you knew what to expect 2 or 3 years from now. You didn't know what to expect in year one. And could he meld this roster together? And could he make it a cohesive team? A lot of talent. That doesn't always make it a team. It makes it a lot of talented players. Doesn't always work well in a team sport. But it's when you got as far as they did and had the kind of season they had, and yeah, they didn't have any, marquee wins. You've got the last 2 games of the season now, and you've got UCLA and you've got Notre Dame. And growing up in Southern California, the way I did, and following college football all across the country, you knew that for USC, you couldn't lose both.
Yep.
If you lost one, it hurt, but you could get over it. If you won both, it was a successful year, period. The UCLA game is more important because it's got the conference race, at stake right there. And so, and with Notre Dame is having a rebuild in the middle of a season, which you don't see often. Usually you got to wait till the off season to rebuild. There was the Marcus Freeman hysteria, after the first 2 losses and the loss to Marshall. And, golly gosh, it's a halfway decent football team right now. He's done a really good job of putting the pieces back together in the middle of the season. But so if you lose that Notre Dame game and you're USC, you're like, it kind of stings because it's the last one before you go into the postseason. And you're kind of left with that bad taste in your mouth for a few weeks until you get to your postseason game. The UCLA one, like I said, it's got conference implications in it. There's a lot riding on it for both teams, which is what makes this year's game so much better than – if you're a UCLA fan, you'll love last year's game because, man, it was, touchdown palooza, for DTR. But you also got to acknowledge that was a really, really bad USC team. I mean, they're just not a lot there, and not a lot of talent and not a lot of heart, quite frankly, from one game to the next. So you kind of, go through some of those machinations when you think about what's at stake and the win and how good is the win and the level of the win. I'm seeing a question. Can I do this, Mark? I see this question kind of addressed to me.
Coming in from LBC Trojan. Thank you so much, Rick.
All right. Let me be honest in that I don't remember the exact year. I'm going to say I know that they lost in 92 to Wisconsin. They lost again in 99 to Wisconsin. They went 3 in a row in the 80s, and I'm not going to that's why I say I'm not going to remember the exact years where they beat Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan, but it was one of those 3 is the last time they won the Rose Bowl.
Michigan 82, Iowa 80, UCLA
Iowa was now I don't know the quarterback, but it was Iowa in 86, 85 season, the 86
season.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. And that was the Eric Ball game where he went crazy. Yeah.
They beat Michigan in the 82 season with Tom Ramsey. Then they beat Illinois in 83.
With Rick Neuheisel.
Yep.
And so 85 against Iowa.
And the Illinois quarterback was Jack Trudeau, who had a great season, that year as well. So yeah, it was. I knew I wouldn't, remember each one by year without a little help. But
look at this!
I was at all 3 of them.
I wouldn't have guessed this, although I remember Matt Stevens.
Sure. Because it's funny because Matt Stevens is on the UCLA broadcast team, and the sideline reporter for the UCLA broadcast team is Wayne Cook, who infamously had horrible play selection at the end of the first game, the first Rose Bowl against Wisconsin, and essentially lost the game for UCLA. But I'm sure Wayne doesn't want to revisit those days. Yeah, Matt Stevens, I remember that. They had the one with Neuheisel when he was the quarterback. There were probably like 5, 6, 7 players who had food poisoning. UCLA players who got sick like on New Year's Eve with wherever they ate, I assume in the hotel they were staying in, and got food poisoning and were horribly sick and lost. Anyway, yeah, I was at all 3 of those Rose Bowls. Matter of fact, I will mark this for posterity. I have been at every UCLA Rose Bowl game since I've been born. That includes the 1966 Rose Bowl against Michigan State when I was 2 months old.
Wow.
But my parents had tickets and didn't have anyone to watch me and brought me with them. So I was there for the upset win over Michigan State.
One of the biggest Rose Bowl upsets ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
12?
Yep. I was there for the 76 game over Ohio State. Archie Griffin and Cornelius Green and
lost Ohio State national championship.
Yep, absolutely. I was there for all the ones in the 80s, and I was. That's right. It was Dick Vermeil, and then he left right after that to go to the NFL, and they brought in some dude named Terry Donahue, and I that worked all right. I was there for both of the losses against Wisconsin, so I've been at every one of them since I've been born. So I stamped that as part of my legacy.
It is kind of interesting that this year is the rebirth of Tennessee. It's the rebirth of UCLA. Two marquee programs that have not won conference championships this century.
Right.
Both come back in the same year after droughts of nearly a quarter of a century.
Who almost faced off in the first BCS championship game.
Except for UCLA's meltdown in Miami. Yeah. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, Tennessee is having an amazing season, and Hendon Hooker, a guy that really played his way out of Virginia Tech, it really wasn't heavily recruited beyond that. I've talked to some coaches about him, and they don't say it in a negative way, I guess, but they're kind of like, yeah, we didn't have a lot of interest in him. We just kind of didn't like where his headspace was when he wanted out of Virginia Tech, and really didn't like where he's going. But man, dude found a home, right? And that offense at Tennessee is a lot of fun to watch. Their defense will cost them from time to time, but the offense is really a lot of fun to watch. And it's a rebirth for Josh Heupel, at that point as well as a head coach. And so it's a lot of fun to watch. I'm getting a kick. I know we're off the UCLA USC subject, so I apologize, but I'm getting a kick out of watching TCU. As Mark knows, I covered SMU for a year when Sonny Dykes was down there, and I like Sonny. He's a good guy, and he was always so cooperative with the media. And I don't want to take up too much of your time on this, Mark, but just a funny anecdote. We've talked about the difference in coaches and how different coaches, when you're covering Lincoln Riley, what access is like, out of USC. When I was covering UCLA, we would be at practice for the 20 minutes we were allowed to physically watch practice, and they would put the offense on the farthest part away from the media, so we couldn't see much, and we'd see a lot of the special teams practice and things like that. But you could sit there on your phone and you could tweet, making up an anecdote that Zach Charbonnet is in a walking boot and not practicing with the running backs. He's working out with the trainers. Now, Chip Kelly would never tell you what was wrong with him. He would just say he's unavailable. That is a standard line. When I'm covering Wake Forest, it is very different. We're allowed to watch all of practice from beginning to end. There are no shutout periods until the season starts. Then we're not allowed to go at all. And in terms of the injured players, they have an area called the pit where they're working out with the trainers. We're not even allowed to say who's in the pit. We're not even allowed to acknowledge the pit exists. It's like all those guys are in witness protection. Can't even talk about them. But when it came to covering SMU and Sonny Dykes, they'd be like, hey, what happened to Shane Buechele? He'd be, oh man, he twisted his ankle. We got it in a bucket of ice right now. We'll see what the swelling is like. He's going to get x-rays tomorrow. We'll give you a heads up on Monday. Sonny did everything short of showing us the x-ray on Monday to talk about the injury report. And it's, as a reporter who does this professionally, I love that, man. The more you tell us, the happier I'm going to be covering the team.
Well, of course, with TCU, you have the exquisite storyline of Garrett Riley potentially locking Lincoln Riley out of the playoff. I mean,
wouldn't that be something?
Cannot make this stuff up.
Right? Wouldn't that be something? I mean,
God.
Yeah. I mean, and I just like the idea that, no offense to Alabama fans, if there's any Alabama fans watching this, I'm perfectly good with Alabama not making the playoffs this year. I am fine with it. I'm fine with Clemson not making the playoffs again. I'm
first
good
year with
it.
Alabama and Clemson both being
That's
out.
right. That's right. I hope TCU gets in there, and they will probably get their rear ends kicked by Georgia up one side and down the other. But man, it'll be fun to have somebody different in there.